Alright, so this chapter starting off with an update on the politics involving the Jujutsu higher-ups, something that we haven't really got an update on in a while, I guess. And the majority of this sequence is revolving around what we had found out at the end of the Shibuya arc, which I guess happened in like chapter 137 when the announcement was made that Gojo had been deemed an accomplice in the Shibuya incident and thus is permanently exiled from the Jujutsu world, and that removing his seal will be considered a criminal act. Masamichi shall receive the death penalty for inciting Gojo, and unfortunately we found out that Kakuganji was the one that killed him. And then also the suspension of Yuji's death sentences is revoked and the execution is to be carried out immediately, and Akotsu is the one to do that. And also let me point out that this is a flashback, by the way, to November 3rd, a couple days after the Shibuya incident. And in light of all of those developments, Noratoshi Kamo from Kyoto High shows up to the Kamo main house, and he's essentially looking for Kakuganji because he's going to try to convince him to convince the other higher-ups, or the conservatives, that, all of that is BS, and that Geto, aka Kenjaku, is actually the bad guy behind all of this stuff. So can we just get a rule reversal and all of that stuff, please? But unfortunately, it doesn't really work out for him, because he finds out in this sequence that Kenjaku himself has taken over the Kamo clan. Because when Noratoshi busts in there, he sees Kenjaku, and he's like, Geto. And then Kenjaku says, I'm done with that name. You learned my true identity in Shibuya. And technically he did, but also at the same time he didn't, because he didn't say hey, I'm Kenjaku, by the way, guys. We, the audience, didn't even find that out until Tengen told the main group, which Noratoshi wasn't part of. So I don't know what he's expecting him to think here, other than I'm not Geto, but I'm like a brain thing. And even if he's expecting him to assume that he was the original Noratoshi Kamo, still that's not who he is anyway. Hey, also guys, if you like my Jujutsu Kaisen content, please subscribe if you haven't already. It's fine if you don't want to, but if you just need a reminder, here you go. Thanks. But then he goes on to say that due to Jujutsu terrorism, the sealing of Gojo, and the culling game, you thought that if the main culprit, although dead, is someone from the Kamo clan, maybe the conservative faction central to Jujutsu headquarters had already become puppets. But going further, he says, but I look like Geto, and there was an order for my execution, so maybe the conservatives were divided, and only some were responsible for the corruption. Kakuganji is trustworthy and has influence with the conservatives, so you wanted to plead with him to retract the notice from the headquarters. This goes back to what I said in the beginning, because in the first panel, we see him calling out for Kakuganji. He's trying to convince him that all of that is BS. And this is also Gege, I guess, telling us that all of the Jujutsu higher-ups weren't corrupted or inherently bad people. They could be reasoned with, in theory. But unfortunately, that's not even really an option anymore, because Kenjaku has implied to have killed them here, because Noritoshi's like, you have already removed them from the party, responsible for recommending Suguru Geto's execution. And then Kenjaku says, as well as the one who named Akotsu as Yuji's executioner. And then Noritoshi's like, he has already found and crushed every hope I had. So yeah, at this point, there's pretty much no way to overturn the ruling that was made on Gojo and Yuji. And also, it's establishing that Kenjaku's pretty much pulling the strings on all of the Jujutsu higher-ups at this point. I think this is fine, and this is a good way of Gege consolidating the lingering storylines here and having them all come into one so that they can all ultimately wrap up at the same time. But then we get this hilarious little sequence at the end here where Kenjaku's like, you have no place here, so we will never meet again. And then Noratoshi gets into a fighting pose and activates blood manipulation. And then Kenjaku starts laughing and he's like, no, not like that. And Noritoshi's like, you didn't intend to kill me? And Kenjaku's like, no, because even if you're alive, nothing will change. And I don't want to mess this place up either. So go get lost somewhere else, okay? So this is awesome, and it really makes me like Kenjaku when you're not supposed to, because he's like, you're not even worth killing, and having to clean up the mess that I would make with you is more of a hassle anyway. And then we cut to the present time and we're seeing Noratoshi and Maki, and I guess this is ultimately what led to Noritoshi's big appearance change. But anyway, now we're coming off at the end of the previous chapter where Maki and Noratoshi were encountered by this huge worm curse, and Noratoshi is kind of confused as to what it is exactly. He's like, that's a curse, right? And Maki's like, I can understand Noritoshi's confusion. It's a cursed spirit, but I've got a weird feeling. And this thing just starts jetting around. And this is pretty awesome paneling from Gege here. This is a great way of showing how fast this thing is. Like, this is one of the better battle manga sequences I've read in the last couple weeks for sure. And it's just a simple display of speed. But anyway, he winds up tackling Maki into a wall. She tries throwing a punch at it, but it's so fast that it just easily diverts it and winds up hitting her into a wall again. And she's like, it's fast, but I sense something more. And then we come to the end of the chapter, and through one of the holes on its head, a face forms together, and it turns out that it's Naoya Zenin. And that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, Naoya is back, and it turns out that the whole theory that we had about him returning as a vengeful cursed spirit was definitely true. And I talked about this last year when Naoya died in chapter 152, and I did say that there was a chance that it wouldn't happen because it wasn't explicitly made clear. It was kind of Gege showing us without telling us, but I'm glad that it did play out that way because it left us wondering what if, and we had time to forget about Naoya. So let me explain how this happened. So first of all, in chapter 33, it's Noratoshi Kamo himself actually that basically says that if a sorcerer is killed without using jujitsu, basically like through traditional means, then they will come back as a curse. And that brings us to the death of Naoya. So after Naoya had fought Maki, after she had slaughtered most of the Zenin clan, she beat him down so bad where he was basically like crawling away, and he couldn't even use like cursed energy anymore. And as he was crawling away, he encountered Maki's mom, who also had her throat recently slit by Maki. I know, Maki is a savage beast at this point, and Maki's mom, seeing Naoya crawling away, with his life, literally stabs him in the back with like a regular kitchen knife. And no jujitsu involved in that, so that's like the big no-no, and because of that, Naoya has now returned as a cursed spirit, or more so, I guess, a vengeful cursed spirit. And as for how he's moving so incredibly fast here, well, I'm assuming it's because he still has his curse technique, which is projection sorcery. Long story short, users of projection sorcery can basically divide 1 second into 24 frames. And they basically do this by seeing like frames of animation in their field of view. And they'll basically decide that they want to do something that is going to take up 24 frames. So in this instance, Naoya is just simply darting forward or darting off of the building in the direction of Maki or whatever. And if they do that as they foresaw it, then it will happen in 1 second. So that's why we see him moving so incredibly fast. Because it's also stated in chapter 151 that maintaining the curse technique, projection sorcery, allows speed to continually build. And that doing this, Naoya had already surpassed subsonic speed. So I guess he's doing the same thing here, if not even more, because I'm assuming he's become much more powerful coming back as a curse at this point, since he's giving Maki a way more competitive fight than he originally did. But also there's another aspect to projection sorcery, and it's the penalty to it. So if they break the foretold 24 frames of movement, like if they do something that goes out of what they originally planned to do, then they'll freeze in like a literal frame of animation for 1 second. Now that doesn't typically happen to the user because they know how it works. But if they touch a person while they're in projection sorcery, then that person also has to abide by the 24 frames that they had already pre-planned. And since the person doesn't have insight into what they're doing, it almost always causes them to freeze in 1 frame. That's why we see that happen. Now, he hasn't done this to Maki in this chapter, but I'm assuming it's inevitable. Probably going to happen in the next chapter too. But another interesting thing here is that Naoya's face is just coming out of like one of the holes here, and there's like multiple holes, which is interesting. I thought that if Naoya's face was going to be revealed, then this whole hollow mask thing would come off. So it's possible that there's more to this worm centipede caterpillar thing than meets the eye. And if it's not that, then I just always assumed there would be like a metamorphosis that will eventually happen with this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Let me know what you think about Naoya coming back. Do you think it's necessary? Do you like him? How do you think this is going to be resolved? And if you liked the video, guys, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.